Boiled potatoes. Right your body. Have dinner ready. Is there a way to link the question of the materiality of the body to the performativity of gender? Old potatoes are better for being peeled and put in cold water an hour before being put over to boil. It wrote itself through me. Plan ahead, even the night before, to have a delicious meal on time. And how does the category of sex figure within such a relationship? They should then be put into fresh cold water when set over the fire. Consider first that sexual difference is often invoked as an issue of material differences. Women must write through their bodies. This is a way of letting him know that you've been thinking about him and are concerned about his needs. New potatoes should always be put into boiling water, and it is best to prepare them just in time for cooking. Sexual difference, however, is never simply a function of material differences, which are not in some way both marked and formed by discursive practices. Most men are hungry when they come home, and the prospects of a good meal are part of the warm welcome needed. Must not let themselves be driven away from their bodies. Are better steamed than boiled. Further, to claim that sexual differences are indissociable from discursive demarcations is not the same as claiming that discourse causes sexual difference. Must thoroughly rethink the body to reappropriate femininity. Prepare yourself. Mashed potatoes. Must not, however, exalt the body, not favor any of its parts formerly forbidden. The category of sex is, from the start, normative. It is what Foucault has called a regulatory ideal. Take 15 minutes to rest so you'll be refreshed when he arrives. Peel the potatoes and let them stand in cold water for half an hour. Then put in the steamer over boiling water and cook them until mealy and quite tender. Touch up your makeup, put a ribbon in your hair, and be fresh looking. He has just been with a lot of work-weary people. In this sense, then, sex not only functions as a norm, but is part of a regulatory practice that produces the bodies it governs, that is, whose regulatory force is made clear as a kind of productive power, the power to produce, demarcate, circulate, differentiate the bodies it controls. Must perceive it in its integrity, must and must nots, their absolution and power. Have ready an earthen basin or a bright tin pan into which you will put your potatoes so that while mashing and preparing they can be kept on the stove and hot. Thus, sex is a regulatory ideal whose materialization is compelled, and this materialization takes place, or fails to take place, through certain highly regulated practices. Be a little gay and a little more interesting. His boring day may need a lift. Now mash well, and finally with the potato masher, and then season with salt. Allow a generous piece of butter, and lastly add a teacup of rich milk. Mix all together well, and then take up on a deep dish. When armors and defense mechanisms are removed, when new awareness of life is brought into previously deadened areas of the body, women begin to experience writing/the world differently. In other words, sex is an ideal construct which is forcibly materialized through time. Clear away the clutter. There will now be 3 or 4 ways to finish this, and which are, first, by putting a little butter on the top, after smoothing nicely, and putting it a moment at the mouth of the oven, and then serving quite hot. Or, you may put it into the oven, which should be quick and hot, and bake the crust a rich brown. It is not a simple fact or static condition of a body, but a process whereby regulatory norms materialize sex and achieve this materialization through a forcible reiteration of those norms. Make one last trip through the main part of the house just before your husband arrives, gathering up school books, toys, paper, etc. This is exciting and also very scary, for it takes time to be able to tolerate greater aliveness. Or again, the top may be scored a golden brown with steel bars made for this purpose. That this reiteration is necessary is a sign that materialization is never quite complete, that bodies never quite comply with the norms by which their materialization is impelled. Then run a dustcloth over the tables, hence the recurrence of musts and must nots. Or, lastly, after mashing the potato, put it into a mold and shape it. Then loosen it from the mold and turn it onto a flat piece of sheet iron, large enough to cover the bottom of the mold with handles at the sides. As soon as a barrier is destroyed, another is immediately erected. Indeed, it is the instabilities, the possibilities for rematerialization, opened up by this process, that mark one domain in which the force of the regulatory law can be turned against itself to spawn rearticulations that call into question the hegemonic force of that very regulatory law. Your husband will feel it has reached a haven of rest and order, and it will give you a lift too. Then have ready a hot lard in which you immerse the molded potato and fry a rich golden brown. But how, then, does the notion of gender performativity relate to the conception of materialization? Call it reform or expansion. Take out, and with a knife under, slide carefully on your platter. In the first instance, performativity must be understood not as a singular or deliberate act, but rather as a reiterative and citational practice by which discourse produces the effects that it names. Or else, well-defined liberation, revolution. Prepare the children. Garnish the dish around with curled parsley leaves. What will, I hope, become clear in what follows is that the regulatory norms of sex work in a performative fashion to constitute the materiality of bodies, and, more specifically, to materialize the body's sex, to materialize sexual difference in the service of the consolidation of the heterosexual imperative. Closure and openness, again, are one ongoing process. We do not have bodies, we are our bodies, and we are ourselves while being the world. Take a few minutes to wash the children's hands and faces, if they are small, comb their hair, and if necessary, change their clothes. If the potato is put in the oven to brown, it should be put in a baking plate and may be sent to the table in the dish in which it is baked, with a knitted cover over. In this sense, what constitutes the fixity of the body, its contours, its movements, will be fully material, but materiality will be rethought as the effect of power, as power's most productive effect. Who can endure constant open-endedness? They are little treasures, and he would like to see them playing the part. French potatoes. Who can keep on living completely exposed? And there will be no way to understand gender as a cultural construct which is imposed upon the surface of matter, understood either as the body or its given sex. Minimize all noise. Peel and cut some potatoes in slices lengthwise. Wipe dry and drop them in boiling lard. Serve very hot. We write, think, and feel with our entire bodies rather than only with our minds or hearts. At the time of his arrival, eliminate all noise of washer, dryer, dishwasher, or vacuum. Rather, once sex itself is understood in its normativity, the materiality of the body will not be thinkable apart from the materialization of the regulatory norm. Potatoes and cream. Sex is thus not simply what one has, or a static description of what one is. It will be one of the norms by which the one becomes viable at all, that which qualifies a body for life within the domain of cultural intelligibility. It is a perversion to consider thought the product of one specialized organ, the brain, and feeling that of the heart. Try to encourage the children to be quiet. Mince cold boiled potatoes fine. Put them into a spider with melted butter in it. Let them fry a little in the butter, well covered. Then put in a fresh piece of butter, season with salt and pepper, and pour over cream or rich milk. Let it boil up once and serve. The forming of a subject requires an identification with the normative phantasm of sex, and this identification takes place through a repudiation which produces a domain of abjection, a repudiation without which the subject cannot emerge. The past convention was that we desire because we are incomplete, that we are always searching for that other missing half. Be happy to see him. Potatoes fried. More recently, we no longer desire, because we simply desire, and we desire as we are. Greet him with a warm smile and be glad to see him. This is a repudiation which creates the valence of abjection and its status for the subject as a threatening specter. Pare potatoes, cut in pieces 1/2 inch wide, and as long as the potatoes. Keep them in cold water till wanted. Drop in boiling lard. When nearly done, take them out with a skimmer and drain them. Boil up the lard again and drop them back and fry till done. This makes them puff up. Sprinkle with salt and serve very hot. I am a being of desire, therefore a being of words, said Nicole Brossard. A being who looks for her body and looks for the body of the other. For me, this is the whole history of writing. Further, the materialization of a given sex will centrally concern the regulation of identificatory practices, such that the identification with the abjection of sex will be persistently disavowed. Some don'ts. Don't greet him with problems or complaints. Don't complain if he's late for dinner. Count this as minor compared with what he might have gone through that day. Potato croquettes. Gathering the fragments of a divided, repressed body and reaching out to the other does not necessarily imply a lack or a deficiency. And yet this disavowed abjection will threaten to expose the self-grounding presumptions of the sex subject, grounded as that subject is in a repudiation whose consequences it cannot fully control. Make him comfortable. Have him lean back in a comfortable chair, or suggest he lie down in the bedroom. Take finely mashed potatoes and mix thoroughly with sufficient salt, pepper, and butter to season well, with sweet milk or cream to moisten. Mix thoroughly with this 1 beaten egg, and then make up into small rolls, being careful to have the surface perfectly smooth. The task will be to consider this threat and disruption not as a permanent contestation of social norms condemned to the pathos of perpetual failure, but rather as a critical resource in the struggle to re-articulate the very terms of symbolic legitimacy and intelligibility. In writing themselves, women have attempted to render noisy and audible all that had been silenced in phallocentric discourse. Have a cool or warm drink ready for him. Arrange his pillow and offer to take off his shoes. Speak in a low, soft, soothing, and pleasant voice. Allow him to relax, unwind. Have ready 1 plate with a beaten egg upon it and another with cracker crumbs. Your body must be heard, Ellen Sixu insists. Women must invent the impregnable language that will wreck partitions, classes and rhetorics, regulations and codes. Listen to him. You may have a lot of things to tell him, but the moment of his arrival is not the time. Let him talk first. Lastly, the mobilization of the categories of sex within political discourse will be haunted in some ways by the very instabilities that the categories effectively produce and foreclose. Dip each roll into the egg and then into the crumbs, and fry of a rich golden brown in hot lard. Make the evening his. Never complain if he does not take you out to dinner or to other places of entertainment. Instead, try to understand his world of strain and pressure, his need to come home and relax. Touch me and let me touch you, for the private is political. Language wavers with desire. It is the language of my entrails, a skin which I caress and feel the other, a body capable of receiving as well as giving, nurturing, and procreating. Lay the croquettes on brown paper first, and serve on a napkin.